It seems like every time a new video game comes out, there is a divide between the critics who receive the game early and have a day one review ready to go versus the people like myself who buy the game and play it at their sort of own leisure. Now, having the choice to experience things at the pace that you want to experience them can go a long way, as dumping 25 hours into a video game that you're not vibing with can make you hate it even more. But for some reason, Atomic Heart just rubbed critics the wrong way, and a lot of them put out reviews stating that the game was just god-awful, unintuitive, bad level design. I mean, you name it, this game really got dragged through the mud. So when I started playing Atomic Heart, I was actually having some issues enjoying the game myself, but I soon realized that I hadn't actually grasped how to take advantage of all the systems in the game. So that's right, I was going to be one of those reviewers that gave you the same blasé take that a lot of other people out there have offered you. Sure, Atomic Heart is a little slow to start, that is true, but I really do think that that had more to do with a lack of understanding from my end more than anything else. And I have become so used to tons of games just spoon feeding me on how to do everything inside of their game that I really did lose all semblance of creative thinking when it came to curating my own experience at all. But about halfway through my playthrough, I finally had an aha moment that brought all the pieces together that really make Atomic Heart shine. From the movement to the combat to the special abilities to all the small additives to every weapon that can turn a simple AK-47 into a fire-breathing beast. Now, don't get me wrong, all the features in the game can be a lot, and since there isn't a ton of hand-holding that I was mentioning before, understanding how to layer these systems over top of one another can actually be a little tricky, especially when some things in the game are utterly useless that you kind of just forget about were even there to begin with. If Atomic Heart is simply a one-time playthrough for you, then unfortunately, you're going to miss out on the complete experience that Atomic Heart has to offer. But if you're the type of person that resonated with this game a lot and are planning on giving it a second go, I would bet that Atomic Heart's campaign experience will be even better, as you can apply all of your new learned skills right from the beginning. While this game may not bring out perfect 10s across the board like other games such as Elden Ring or God of War Ragnarok, developers Mundfish have brought something not only original to the table, but quite unique. And when it comes to bringing something that stands out on the fringes as far as risk-taking goes, it's important to have proper expectations. Atomic Heart is a weird game. It's slow to get going, but once the engine is warmed up, you will be immersed into a world of sci-fi brutality, sexuality, and vanity, all in the name of Mother Russia. And let me tell you, Mother Russia is one kinky lady. Ooh, god damn! So do I think Atomic Heart is a must-play? Well, I'm gonna say most definitely, as this is something you're never going to experience again, or at least until Mundfish brings about a sequel. And if you are especially interested in art or media that likes to take chances or content that makes you feel uncomfortable, then yeah, I think this is something worth giving a chance to. This game actually reminds me of a similar experience I had when watching American Beauty for the first time, or the feelings of discomfort when watching the hotel scene from The Devil's Rejects by Rob Zombie. And while Atomic Heart isn't prestigious as some other media out there, it is definitely one hell of a start. And if Mundfish decides to make an Atomic Heart 2, which I sure as hell hope they do, I genuinely think it will be one of the best FPS titles of modern gaming, as they will now know what works and what doesn't. And finding a balance upon a tightrope that is not often walked upon in the video game medium is challenging, risk-taking, and at times, financial suicide. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Atomic Heart. One thing that both critics and fans have agreed upon is the near perfect stability that Atomic Heart brings to the table. I don't think there is a machine out there that you could throw this game at that wouldn't be able to run it at a locked 60 when you find the correct settings for the game. I tried it on a few PCs, one desktop with a 3080 Ti, and then two laptops, one that has a 3080 and one that is connected to an eGPU running a 2080 Ti inside of the case. And every single machine was running things so damn damn smoothly. Obviously, the machines with the 3080s ran 4K between 60 and 140 FPS, but what really shocked me was my jerry-rigged laptop that I have connected to my TV to play like smaller titles, and generally due to the CPU in this laptop, I will have to have things running at around 1080p 60, maybe a little lower, but Atomic Heart was hitting 1080p and 1440p both at 60 FPS, and then it would hit 4K at around 30 FPS with occasional dips. So you're probably not going to want to play it at that high of a level, but everything below it was just rock solid. And the stability remains like this throughout the entire game. It's not like you have some incidents where the frames just drop because you're in a crazy fight scene. Like, you're pretty much locked where you want to be. Of course, there's going to be some incidents. I had two during my entire game. One being a bug where during a train crash, about a quarter of the way through the game, it caused this visual glitch where like the train was just over everything and causing a lot of clipping and I couldn't see anything. And then I had a crash during a later part in the game. But all I needed to do was just quickly reboot my computer or the app itself, and we were just back in business. So I know there isn't really too much to say about a game running well, but I wanted to bring it up because it's just really uncommon for games in the AAA space to run so smoothly, especially with all of the effects in this game, tons of enemies, beautiful set pieces, amazing cutscenes. I was not expecting things to run as tightly as they did. So kudos to Mundfish for putting out a nearly perfect game. And if you at home are worried about this running on maybe a Series S or a lower end laptop or PC, there is no need to worry at all, as this thing can run on a frickin' Steam Deck. So while you may have to fine tune your settings just a little bit, it will run well and is more than likely to be exceptionally stable. Atomic Heart also brings some very weird and interesting narrative elements to the table that I can see being very hit or miss with people depending on their preference of storytelling. Full disclosure, there will be some spoilers here, but I'm going to keep it pretty light if you're somebody who cares about the story, so I will be revealing some important bits, but the journey to arrive there is very dense and convoluted. And since there's no way I can actually cover all of it in this video, you can most likely watch what we talk about here and still enjoy the story in its full context later when you play through the game, but it depends on your level of interest, I suppose, so just letting you know preemptively. With that out of the way, we are beginning the story content in 3, 2, 1. Here we go. I personally enjoyed the story a lot as it was very dark, weird, and unsettling, but I do ultimately think that it overstayed its welcome. There were a lot of twists and turns that could have been a lot more interesting if it were not for the excessive amount of dialogue brought to light through the glove that you wear on your left hand and main character quotes. And to be quite honest with you, a lot of the story could have just been condensed from the beginning and up through about the middle of the game. There was a lot of narrative travel down windy roads that weren't totally necessary, and they would kind of lose me after a bit. So for example, there were numerous moments in the game where there would be a cutscene that essentially explains everything and implies certain elements that are going on, and then shortly after, your character and your glove will have about a 5 to 10 minute conversation about the subtle nuances and reasoning as to why everything happened the way it did. And I'm not just talking about a light breakdown. I'm talking about an in-depth college level AP course breakdown of what just happened. Now, is it bad to have all of this extra content in the game? No, it's not bad at all. Not in the slightest. I just think when you start to go off into the weeds like this, it should be for the mega fans that love the story and the world so much that they're replaying the game or going down certain avenues to find radios and documents with tons of narrative elements to sink their teeth into. Whereas the average fan like myself can get easily overwhelmed and lost and just start to lose interest overall. However, even though there was a lot of excess noise, I still really enjoyed the main plot points of the story. And what really makes Atomic Heart a great game isn't really the why, but the how. And the how in this game is fucking weird. And you see, the thing with super strange stories, at least in my opinion, is there are moments that work really well and moments that they're just awful. But that's the price you pay for going to the realm of unconventional. Things don't always work out the way that they're supposed to, so let's start at the beginning. The game begins by showing you this beautiful utopia of the Soviet Union being led by a scientific genius named Dr. Sechenov. Everything is automated with robots that are designed to have high intelligence that help with daily human tasks so that the citizenry can focus on more important things like popping off on Insta or starting a brand new new OnlyFans. You know, real important work. Anyways, Dr. Sechenov is preparing to launch a program called Collective, which is supposed to allow regular humans to interface with robots via mind control, while simultaneously bringing the basic political and cultural power structures of the Soviet Union into the digital and virtual realms. All of this is a little oversimplified, but as I mentioned, the story is very all over the place and quite convoluted. And of course, the robots are compromised and activated to turn on the humans, as you would assume, and they begin to kill everybody. You play as P3, aka Sergey, who is more or less Dr. Sechenov's puppy soldier on a leash who will do whatever he says and wants you to investigate why all this stuff is happening and find the culprit responsible. So you do. Along the way, you learn that the Collective program was actually a way to put humans into a state of cognitive bliss and turn them into people with no free will and to be controlled in any way that their leaders tell them to. You also learn that you were a hardcore Soviet soldier in a previous life, and Dr. Sechenov saved you, wiped your memories clean, and inserted a device into your brain that could be used to control you further than you would want to be controlled when he deemed necessary. Again, the story is very complicated, but essentially it's all about doctors that tried to do right by humanity, crossed some lines along the way, betrayed you and everything you know, but it wasn't all bad because they created some of the naughtiest mommies in all of the robot kingdom who are designed to titillate you at every turn. And titillate they do. I mean, just look at those giant robot The interesting thing is, games that are this weird will have some beautiful scenes in them. Scenes that really make you think. Scenes that will make you say, wow, what did I just witness? Or this was done beautifully. While other scenes will make you feel intense cringe that just courses through your veins and you can't wait to get up and leave the theater. And a few moments ago, I brought up how Atomic Heart reminded me of some of the more uncomfortable elements of American Beauty, which is a great movie from the 2000s. And there are many scenes where Angela, the main love interest in American Beauty, is naked and surrounded with flowers, and you feel this sense of intrigue and vulnerability and a level of discomfort like you're not supposed to be there witnessing what you are. These strangely put together scenes are intense and beautiful and filled with obscure emotion. Atomic Heart attempts to mimic some of these moments, and sometimes they even pull it off.
How are you doing, my boy? Not good. I failed you again. This is too much.
It's too much for all of us, this terrible incident.
But then later in the game, they will bring a goo man to life to control the world, and he is petting a cat with no face. And now the writers have crossed into a world of absurdity rather than strange and uncomfortable primal urges that we all feel as humans from time to time. For the most part, the game's story balances this happy, bright-colored aesthetic with dark, strange elegance combined with a perverted sexual deviance brought out through the machines that we are interfacing with. And while I have heard a lot of people saying that this means the devs didn't have a narrative in mind or the game design was totally directionless, I feel quite the opposite. I feel like their narrative direction was meant to be chaotic and derivative. I believe that the writers and developers were trying to show that this utopia came at a cost, and that cost was chaos ensuing in a way that the citizens and government workers never could have fathomed. All of this death and sexuality is painted on a backdrop that was bright, clean, aesthetic, and that contrast is part of the story. The problems come not from the ideas, but the structure surrounding them. When there are this many unique and interesting ideas, there undoubtedly is going to be a clash. And that's why the game struggled to hook me at the beginning, and it wasn't until the treachery between characters began to unfold behind the Iron Curtain that anything felt interesting in my heart at all. Most of Atomic Heart is, at its core, an amazingly polished title with great combat, movement, level design, world building, bosses, all of that stuff. Like the narrative bits of the game, I do think it takes a little while to get going, but that's not really a huge problem for me in a game like this, as I believed it was pertinent to be patient. Of course, that isn't the same attitude I will have for every video game, but with this game, I just followed my gut. But there's one thing in this game that I absolutely hate, and that was the open world design choice. But thank baby Jesus, the open world part of this title is minimal because it's an absolute shit show. And I'll explain why in a bit. I just want you to know that if you decide to tap out at any point in this video, while, of course hitting the like button before you go, that the open world aspect of this game is really the only awful thing about it. Because let's be real, everything else here gameplay wise is great for the most part, and you're gonna be satisfied and happy to have played through, and you're maybe gonna even replay it in years to come, or at least to prep when Mundfish brings out Atomic Heart Part 2. Before we dive into anything related to combat or level design, I think we first need to discuss the weaponry, our beloved glove, and the in-game economy. So yeah, the weapons in Atomic Heart were a little underwhelming in my opinion, probably my least favorite part of the game besides the actual atrocious open world. The best weapons in my experience were the AK-47, the pistol, and the shotgun. There are a few other weapons to choose from, tons of melee weapons, 3 energy weapons, and a rocket launcher. I may be missing some, but that's the general gist of it all. Most things work just like you'd assume they would, except all the melee weapons and the bullet weapons had something that could be added to them called a cartridge system. How it works is when you finally have enough currency to install the mechanism onto your weapon, you can find or buy 3 types of elemental cartridges: fire, ice, and electricity. For those of you who have played COD Zombies in the past, this is very similar to double packer punching your weapons and having that elemental ability attached to it, but instead of it being permanent like in COD, this is a temporary buff that needs to be constantly re-added or repurchased. This one feature changes the game so much that I was pissed I didn't learn about it sooner. It changes every combat scenario from actual bullet sponge enemy hell to a unique and fair fighting system just simply by using the correct types of resources against whichever enemy needs them to be taken down. And for whatever reason, these extra abilities could only be added to bullet weapons, and I guess I can see why it does make a bit of sense, but with that trade-off, I never really wanted to use the electricity weapons. Not only could I upgrade my AK to have an electric ability on it, but the reload speed on these electric weapons was so slow, I didn't find it necessary to use them a majority of the time. It seemed for the most part that these weapons were only meant for temporary use or as a crutch as to not bleed out all of your ammo against a boss or a horde of enemies. The 2 energy weapons that I had used had such a slow recharge time that it didn't make them useful in my regular arsenal of weapons. And you may be saying to yourself, well, Alex, did you grab the schematic for fast reload time? And I say to you, kind sir or madam, no, I didn't. And I am also not sure if it even exists because I forgot to check. So for those of you that are unaware, there are schematics hidden in trunks all over the place that allow you to craft certain items for your guns or perhaps for certain health packs, etc., etc. etc. And for the most part, I did grab a lot of these plans as they are along the main path for the campaign, but because there were so many weapons and parts and pieces to collect for, I have no idea if I uncovered everything since there were so many extra schematics hidden in the quote-unquote open world, and there was no way in hell I was going to go out there and get them. I just was really hoping to experience some very cool unique weapons along the way of this game's main story, because you'd think inside of a futuristic take of the Soviet Union, we would get other weapon types other than just the bullet guns and electric guns. And not to pull COD Zombies into everything I do, but some of the most amazing weapons we have ever seen in video game history have come from that game, and I really don't see other developers taking inspiration from one of the best shooters in the business. Why not have a black hole gun that sucks robots into another dimension, or a shrink ray allowing you to kick enemies across the landscape, or perhaps a gun that shoots a blast of pressurized air spitting hordes of enemies into the ether? But guns and other elemental weaponry wasn't your only option in the game. P3, or Sergei, comes with a glove that's able to host a few special abilities of its own, while also giving you tons of personal character abilities to become harder, better, faster, stronger. Yes, I do realize it's illegal to be cringe, and I will be planning on going to jail shortly after the posting of this video. Alright, so what types of ability does the glove offer? So there's the main shocking ability, which shoots out an electric beam at any type of enemy. It's usually pretty great to take out enemies that are in the air. There is a freezing ability, which, you guessed it, freezes the enemies. An ability that performs a mass telekinesis lift, where you can hold enemies in the air for a certain amount of time and shoot the crap out of them. Then there is a polymer ability that allows you to shoot what looks like the material in a fire extinguisher, and when you coat an enemy with that, you can freeze enemies much more severely, as well as all of the elemental damage from your weapon is increased. Then the final ability was a polymeric shield that blurred your vision but prevented you from getting hit from enemies or receiving certain types of elemental damage. I didn't upgrade that one very far, so I'm not sure of all the skills on that skill tree. I have seen a lot of people using the freeze and the mass telekinesis abilities, but I do think that the best combo was the polymer jet and the freeze ability. Having the prowess to freeze any enemy, especially main bosses, was very advantageous to my strategy. And when you would combine that technique along with your elemental ammo, it made every encounter very fun, as you would eventually just dominate the space by being so severely overpowered. And each of these skills had their own skill tree, and Mundfish was very liberal with being able to upgrade your character's abilities, as opposed to being able to upgrade or build all of the weapons in your combat arsenal. And I think that's a bit of an interesting choice. I really would have liked to experience all of the weapons in the game on my first playthrough, because to be honest, I'm probably not going to play it again anytime soon. However, I understand there is a lot to choose from, and it can feel overwhelming at times, causing players to default to only using one type of playstyle in the combat arena. Which is why I think what has frustrated a lot of people with comments, reviews, or what have you, is the idea that combat is designed around the bullet sponge ideology. And I don't know, I think that is an option most certainly if you choose to play that way, but the way that I look at Atomic Heart is that it's really a big puzzle game with a ton of FPS mechanics and abilities. The combat in this game is crazy good, and it feels like a mix between Doom, a little bit of Call of Duty, and Metro Exodus. Not to mention the melee combat in this game is top notch. It's almost like Dead by Daylight melee combat, but completely perfected. But again, here lies the same issue that plagues the story, and it's that all of these systems take a while to come together, and the in-game economy isn't as fruitful as I would have hoped for, at least when it comes to the weapons front. When you can actually upgrade or build weapons that are powerful, the game's combat turns around 180 degrees. You used to not be able to survive without 10,000 health packs, but now, once you are upgrading the best melee weapons in the game, you're 2 or 3 shotting most of the enemies in your path while pushing out tons of elemental damage with your firearms using the cartridge upgrade system. And I'll admit, it took me way longer than it probably should have to figure out how to run my game's economy properly. But once I did, I caught up to where I was supposed to be, and I was overpowering enemies with ease. This doesn't mean that Atomic Heart becomes a Doom clone and you're running around using the BFG. There is a ton of room to grow, as each boss encounter allows you to struggle just enough to make you work for it, while also allowing you to use what you have learned and acquired transpired throughout the campaign. But I truly don't understand how somebody could state that the game's enemy design was left wanting or created bullet sponge scenarios, because if they did, then they simply didn't understand the entire combat system. So let me provide a few examples in case I'm not being clear enough, because my goal here isn't to attack anybody who doesn't see things the way that I do or eventually did, but more so to defend Atomic Heart against what I deem unreasonable backlash. The first boss fight most people will encounter was against a giant ball with like legs and rockets, and you swing down a zip line and then all hell breaks loose. The game makes it seem like you're just meant to shoot and dodge, and eventually the weak points will reveal, and then you'll shoot those and rinse and repeat. But what you're supposed to do is lift up hidden structures from underground, have the enemy roll into them, temporarily knock itself out, and then shoot the weak points. And then there was the Belly Ash. This is the boss right before you enter the theater, and it was proving to be quite difficult when I went into the fight with only a shotgun. But then I decided to update my character and my weapons arsenal, and using my freeze and polymer abilities, I was able to stop the fire from hurting my character and freeze the Belly Ash in place. Once I did that, I attached elemental cartridges to my gun and did even more damage to him that way. This turned a long, boring, and grueling fight into something a lot more fun and enjoyable with risk-taking and experimentation. And my favorite boss by far was Natasha the Giant Ballerina. During this encounter, I will happily admit it took me way too long to figure out how to take her down properly, but it did eventually click. However, by that time I had almost already killed her, so it really didn't matter. Eventually, Natasha will fly into the sky and drop these explosive balls that follow you around, and I was destroying them to protect myself, but you can actually use them to your advantage. If you use your glove to pick them up telekinetically, you can throw them at the machine, causing an explosion, and tons of damage will ensue, making this fight a walk in the park. The main issue here is that you aren't normally picking up items to throw at enemies, at least that's not how I was playing the game, so some of these mechanics just don't occur to you right away simply because there are so many ways to skin a cat that you may forget something along the way on your combat journey. To simply put, there is no bullet sponge enemy, there's no secret here, it's all just combining the features in the game and making them work to your advantage depending on the character you're fighting and their weaknesses. I simply like to look at it this way: every boss encounter, every enemy type has its own puzzle to unlock in order to defeat it. Sure, you can use all of the rockets and bullets in order to take down whatever enemy you want, but you're going to go through so much ammo because you're not really playing the game correctly. And I suppose we can argue about the philosophy of potentially limiting playstyle, but I would argue that Atomic Heart doesn't do the best job of making a lot of its standout features known to the player. And since this game is so dense from a narrative standpoint, a design standpoint, enemy variety, you name the category, and there is a ton there to dive into, I can see why players may not know about a certain weapon or ability or style of combat simply because of the sheer magnitude of options that Mundfish have provided here, which is why this game may need a second or even third playthrough to really experience everything it has to offer, or at least to understand it all as thoroughly as possible. But before we move on to art and level design, I want to talk about enemy types and the encounters that you will experience that could sometimes leave you a little bit frustrated in certain scenarios. There seems to be two branches of enemy types: robots and then mutant zombies. The zombies are much more fun to fight as there are a limited number of enemy subtypes that you have to experience. How the zombies work is there will be a pod on the wall that will spit out flying plants that can burrow into corpses, essentially reviving them, turning them into demon zombies that want to kill you. So it's up to you how you want to bring these guys down, because if you don't go for the weakest enemies first, the newer mid-level enemies are going to keep spawning in, so you're going to have to be mindful and work counterintuitively to how you would normally take down a horde of enemies. And I just really love that kind of stuff. It really gets the creative juices flowing and has you paying attention to the subtle details between enemies so that you know how to strategically make your way through your environment to not only beat the level, but to maximize your resources for future boss encounters. So the robot enemy types were okay, but they all felt, I don't know, just kind of annoying to me. There were a few human designed robots that just kicked the shit out of you more or less, while other robots would have wheels and blades that would slice and dice you. There are parallels between the zombie mutants and the robots, where the robots could also revive one another, which I will touch on in just a moment, but it was much less interesting and made moving through the spaces with robots a lot more tedious. But once I figured out how much elemental damage helps to take these bastards out, it really changed how I interacted with the AI as opposed to cowering at the beginning portion of the game. Fortunately, Atomic Heart doesn't get stale, and it doesn't put one type of enemy over another excessively, and you are constantly meeting new baddies along the way. Some are more fun than others, of course, but it's safe to say that the enemy variety in this game isn't lacking and will definitely keep you on your toes as you learn the ins and outs of defending yourself against all of these mechanical and bioweapon critters. We have now arrived at a point where I believe there is some genuine criticism to be levied at the developers of Atomic Heart. The way that some of this campaign sits is primarily inside of the traditional linear path, but then there are these jarring open world sections that, in my opinion, don't make any fucking sense at all. Now, I will say that these open world sections are brief, but they are so unimportant, I don't really understand why they're in the game at all. Maybe they are around to make it seem like there are more items to find or more story to uncover, but it's so difficult to navigate through these spaces, I don't understand why Munfish thought it would be a good idea. Basically, when you come up from one of the many underground facilities, you'll pop up for fresh air to make your way to the next major campaign point. But when you do this, there are so many enemies, it's unfathomable and impossible to keep up with. You will burn through so many resources, it's just more wise to keep moving forward altogether. Since the whole facility is known for its robotic and futuristic nature, there are cameras everywhere that alert your presence to the robots, and when you kill the robots, repair robots will spawn in to fix the robots you have just killed, and round you go every few meters. It's an impossible task that's not even remotely fun or important to deal with. So here's my advice to you if you are struggling with this bit of the game, because believe me, you can die a lot in these brief open world encounters. If you are traveling, stay in the grass and just sprint. Don't drive, it's a waste of time. Just keep cutting through the grass, jump off cliffs, do whatever you can do to make it to the next point, even if it's thousands of meters away. Also, if you do pop on the main road every so often, there are tons of little save points. Make sure to save as frequently as you can, because if you do make it to the end before the next campaign area is accessed and you die by chance, you will have to start all the way at the beginning. So don't fight, don't drive, just run and save and run and save and run and save and run and save. Fortunately, this is really the worst part of the game. As far as everything else goes, we are really sitting pretty. One of the most enjoyable things to me in an FPS title is how the player has to move and engage through space. And one of the most interesting ways to keep my attention is through puzzles. And it's one of the reasons why I love Call of Duty Zombies Easter eggs so much, as well as playing other amazing shooters or narrative-driven games. Solving puzzles and then getting into amazing boss battles where they have their own small puzzles to solve. It's just so much goddamn fun. Atomic Heart does not stray away from puzzle engagement in the slightest. I know I briefly touched upon it in the combat section when I stated that each main boss has like a methodology in which to take it down. And that's true. And that same approach was utilized perfectly within the puzzle design from level to level. The various locks on the doors that had color-coded puzzles or tempo-driven puzzles, using the floating castle to move the ball through the maze into the hole, playing a game of Snake, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are a lot of puzzles to solve, and I think that this game might have some of the best puzzles and the implementation of those puzzles that I have ever played in a first-person shooter. There is a whole section where there are magnets on the ceiling that you have to electrocute in order to push up and down on certain platforms so that you can make your way across the room. And when you combine this with all of the boss fight encounters and solving for their demise, it allows for an engaging experience that isn't just a bullet spongy, mindless shooter bullshit game. And in fact, I think it's quite the opposite. There are so many things that complement one another so perfectly. The art and level design in particular are quite interesting, as Munfish takes us on a very specific journey between elegance, science, sexuality, and chaos, and they blend it together through everything inside of the experience. But just like the rest of the package here, things take time to build up and are a little boring at first. P3 and our glove are exploring underground labs and office spaces, trying to further understand what is exactly going on. There are a lot more random twists and turns in the initial introductory sequence, as the developers are trying to establish everything from plot lines to combat to special abilities, and like I've said a million times in this video, there is just so much happening at all times, it merely takes a minute for the dust to settle. But that doesn't mean the exploration in the early levels of the game are ugly or uninteresting. In fact, it's anything but. I just felt like some of the missions and the tasks that were assigned designed weren't portrayed as expertly like they were in the second half of the game. And I'd like to show you by example, so please bear with me for just a few more moments. In our initial exploration of the labs, there is a sequence that occurs where we have to keep feeding this giant tree demon thing, and P3 has to go and retrieve more feed for it. We do this interesting yet laborious puzzle, and then we arrive back to the tree. And it looks like for a second that we're going to have our first big boss fight with this robot tree demon thing, but instead we just leave and go fight a mini boss instead. The game sets your expectations very high for a moment where you think you're going to be fighting a brutish science experiment gone rogue while being introduced to all sorts of new enemies that would then be peppered throughout the game. But that didn't exactly happen, and instead we received a mediocre fight. Later in the game, there is a moment in the theater where we are attempting to acquire an electric globe or a lamp in order to turn on power to activate a robot ballet. Once you do, music starts playing in the background and it's classical and elegant, but unfortunately it attracts enemies, and you're left to your own devices to slaughter this horde of mutants, and it's disgusting and beautiful, and it's hands down my favorite moment in the game. But that isn't all, because a few moments later in the theater, you're set up to fight Natasha, our big gal robot ballerina, who is accompanied by dancing robots all around her, preventing you from leaving. And it's these moments that really stuck with me, because it's not always about having some big battle that's important to make your game interesting, but it's the presentation and the build-up that leads to a proper expectation and sequence that's truly memorable. Yes, Atomic Heart does take a little while to figure out its own voice, but once it does, I really felt like everything started to just fall into place perfectly. I think the reason that so many critics didn't enjoy this game is due to the fact that they are looking at Atomic Heart all wrong. For a studio formed in 2017 taking on their first huge AAA title, this is extremely impressive. It came out bug-free with some of the best shooting and melee mechanics in the business, beautiful art design, a wild story, and amazing puzzles, enemies, and bosses. I mean, what the hell is there to even be upset about? Not to pick on any one YouTuber here, but when I see titles like these ones, I just wonder what game are they playing, because the experience that the average person is going to have is vastly different from people who judge video games for a living. And it's not to say that their opinions are bad or that their experience is invalid, but when you compare Atomic Heart to Forspoken, Wild Heart, or the Callisto Protocol, it's not even close with how far Mundfish overshot these other studios. And this is their first game ever. Imagine the second, the third, the fourth. And I get that Atomic Heart isn't perfect, and there is a lot in this package that's confusing, but this is a game that has replay value and tons of content packed in, making it well worth its asking price. So whether it's art design, level structure, or puzzles, there was always something engaging and interesting to do or explore, which elevates Atomic Heart to a list of new FPS titles to look forward to. I was severely impressed by just how many risks this studio took, and how, even though not everything worked, Mundfish always stuck their landing. Top tier performance, graphics, and gameplay is hard to come by in modern gaming. And when I see a game like this, it gives me hope that there is still some semblance of originality and creativity in an industry that simply loves to copy and paste battle passes from one game to the next. I don't want people to look ahead and think about the next COD or Battlefield that's going to launch broken and incomplete. I want them to think about the next Atomic Heart game and how much it will have improved over its freshman release. So thank you all so much for sticking around until the end of this video. I hope you know how much I appreciate you doing so. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, ring the bell, all that good stuff. And I look forward to reading your thoughts in the comments down below, and I will see you guys all in the next video. Peace out, everybody.